Here in Washington, we're lucky to have over 700 miles of public beaches where you can collect clams and oysters yourself. I'm Doug Rogers with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and this is Buster, a fellow shellfish aficionado. We're going to give you some pointers on digging clams and shucking oysters, and a few suggestions on how to eat them.
If you want to harvest clams in Washington State, there's a few things you need to know before you go. You need to know the rules, you need to know the season, and you need to know if it's safe to harvest on the same day you plan to harvest. The first thing you need to know are the rules. That includes the daily bag limit, having a shellfish seaweed license, and knowing your size limits. You also need to know the season. All beaches are managed beach-specific seasons, and you can get that information at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife webpage or from our Shellfish Seasons hotline. The third thing you need to know is to make sure that the beach is safe the same day you plan to harvest. That information is available from the Washington Department of Health website or their Shellfish hotline. Once you're into the beach-specific page, there's a quick link there to the Washington State Department of Health website that gives you the specific health information for that site on the same day you plan to harvest. Things change quickly with health status, so it's very important that you check the status of the specific beach you're going to the same day you plan to harvest. First thing you're going to want is a bucket. 5-gallon bucket's perfect because you have enough room to carry water as well. It's very handy to have a mesh bag. This is one that we found on the beach. A potato sack will also work. This serves two purposes. The first is that you are required by law to keep your catch separated by individual. This allows each person to put their catch in a bag, but then keep it all in the same bucket. It's also a really easy way to rinse your clams, much easier than refilling a bucket and dumping it and trying to rinse sand that way. We also recommend bringing gloves. It's not essential, but it does help when you're reaching down into potentially sharp stuff in a hole.
This is a good example of the different habitat types where you're going to find different clams in each location. Up high, where there are more barnacles growing on the rocks up here that aren't covered by the algae, is more little neck habitat. It's higher in the tidal elevation. As you move lower on the beach, you run into native little necks, butter clams even down lower, and horse clams down lower than that. Gooey duck will be further out.
Oh, it takes a lot of luck and a certain kind of pluck for to dig around a muck just to get a gooey duck, because he hasn't got a front and he hasn't got a back. He doesn't know Donald and he doesn't go quack. Dig a duck, dig a duck, dig a gooey duck, dig a duck, dig a gooey duck, dig a duck a day. Dig a duck, dig a duck, dig a gooey duck, dig a duck, dig a gooey duck, dig a duck a day.
Generally, there's a 4-hour window around low tide that you can harvest Manila clams. It's a little bit of a tighter window around some of the deeper living clams. Often what you see is a shallow 2 squirts is going to be butter clams. The horse clam is the known gusher that many people comment on when they walk on Washington beaches. It's a big whoosh that comes up, and believe me, they can really soak your shorts. Be sure to look for and read signs. You'll find information from the Department of Health on biotoxin closures, as well as information on bag limits, whether the beach is open and closed, or how to fill in your holes. We're looking for siphon holes here on the beach. That's the little holes that the clams make when they stick their siphons out. And a lot of people make the mistake of walking over the very best clam ground and running right down to the water's edge. We're actually pretty high on the beach here, and we're starting to find quite a few siphon shows. Each one of these is where a clam siphon is coming out to feed and excrete waste. I think this looks like a good spot here. Let's give it a go. This is what we would recommend for digging steamer clams rather than a shovel. The tool is better the closer together the tines are, because you're going to be raking clams out with this. The advantage to using a rake is that you're not moving very much of the substrate. You are required to fill in every hole that you create while digging clams, and so we like to make it easier on ourselves by not moving a bunch of soil. And this is what we're after.
On the Manila little neck, on the bottom side of the hinge right here, there's a little pocket. On the native little neck in the same location, there's a ridge. The shape is also different, but the pocket is the easiest way to tell the difference between the two.
Notice that I'm not moving very much of the substrate with the rake. These clams only live 2 to 4 inches below the surface, so you really don't need to dig a big hole. You just want to scratch away at it. And be sure to look in your pile as you're digging, because you'll see I've scraped past some. They've fallen aside. They didn't pop out to me right away, but I can see them in the pile. We often walk back over a beach after harvest and find a lot of clams people just didn't even notice in the dirt that they were digging. All right, let's measure some of these. You will need a measuring device for the Manila steamer clams. We have a couple options. These are available at sporting goods stores. The part of this tool that we'll be using is this hole. Notice that we have it tied off to our bucket and also to myself. This is really a good tip because they're super easy to lose these out on the beach. So the way to tell that a clam is legal is that it needs to be 1.5 inches across the longest part of the shell. Essentially, if you can find a way that it does not fall through your hole, it's a legal size clam. You don't need to measure it this way. It's any way you can find that it will not fall through. So that's legal. This one falls through, it's sublegal. I'm going to set it aside to replant. Legal. Even people that have been clamming for years should use a gauge because it's easy for your eye to start to trick you, especially if you're digging a lot of small clams. All right, I'm going to replant these little ones. We came here today on a -1 foot tide height. We've come down fairly close to the water to get into the butter clam and horse clam habitat. So there's 2 types of shovel. We would recommend something like this because, again, you're not moving very much of the substrate. You can also use a standard spade. These are the tools that you're going to need for digging for the deeper living species, butter clams and horse clams, and sometimes even native little necks. We are just actually now about a half hour past low tide, so we're still within that tide window of 2 to 4 hours around low tide. You can certainly get butter clams on a much lower tide, but a -1 foot on a beach like this is just perfect. So Doug's using a technique that we recommend where he's digging alongside the show. This allows the clam to fall into the hole rather than digging on it and possibly breaking the shell. Butter clams do not need to be purged, so it's really not that important if you break the shell, but it makes for a prettier clam and easier to process if the shell's intact when you harvest them. You can see he's moving a lot more dirt here and going quite a bit deeper than when we were digging Manila and native little neck clams. The butter clams are 1 foot to 1.5 feet down. Horse clams are about 1.5 feet to 2 feet down. These are kind of medium-sized butter clams that he's getting. They do come quite a bit larger. When you're harvesting butter clams, it's important to have a scale with you on the beach to make sure you don't exceed the 10-pound limit. Clams of this size, you can probably take about 25 clams before you reach the 10-pound limit. There's a horse clam. Yeah, there's the pea crab coming out of it.
That seems like a pretty productive hole.
Yeah, the crab's the housekeeper.
Is that unusual?
No, they all have a pea crab or 2 in them, and they serve as the housekeeper. They keep the mantle clean, feed off detritus. I have a butter clam here and a horse clam. These came out of the same hole. The horse clams are generally a little bit deeper in the substrate, 1.5 feet down or so, whereas butter clams start at about 1 foot down. The easiest way to tell them apart is to look here at the top where the siphon sticks out. The common name for these is fat gaper clam because there's always this opening here in the shell when the valves are closed. It doesn't completely seal. On the butter clam, it can close up much tighter. Also, the siphon has this leathery sheath on it. You won't see that on the siphon of a butter clam. And it has plates on the top too, which is an easy diagnostic between the horse clam and the gooey duck. Gooey ducks do not have these leathery plates. When you look at the shell, the butter clam shell is a much heavier, chalkier shell, thick, whereas this is a sharp edge here on the horse clam, and it has this brown shellacking, which may cover more of the shell than this one or even less. This is called the Periosteum. This will be present on a horse clam, but you'll never find it on a butter clam. Notice that both of these clams only have concentric rings on the shells. There's no radiating lines coming out from the hinge like you'll find on a Manila clam or a native little neck. only concentric rings. That's another easy diagnostic to know that you have a butter clam or a horse clam. There's a separate daily limit for horse clams, 7 horse clams per person, and it's the first 7 that you dig. The butter clams are part of the aggregate limit of up to 40 clams, not to exceed 10 pounds in the shell. Unlike the Manila clams and the native little necks, butters aren't as readily able to dig themselves back in. So if we decide not to take these, or if we've managed to dig more than what our limit was, we want to replant them. And we do that by going back to the original hole. You want to make sure that you know the pointy side on these guys. They are not very good at riding themselves in the substrate, especially in the slurry of a hole. So it's very important that you know the pointy side. The easiest way to tell on the butter clam is to find that ligament that's holding the valves together. That wants to be up. And you're going to plant the clam about a foot down. Pack some soil around it because they will flop over as you're filling in the hole. And you want to give these guys the best fighting chance they have to stay upright and able to continue to siphon and grow.
And then cover them up.
And if you're going after oysters, you're going to want your oyster container because you are required to shuck oysters on the beach and leave the shells behind.
And the minimum legal size of an oyster is 2.5 inches, and I have it marked on my glove so I can always tell if I have the right size.
Finding oysters is the easy part. They lie right on the surface of the beach, either attached to each other or attached to rocks. There are 2 really good reasons to shuck your oysters and leave the shells on the beach. First of all, it's the law on all public beaches in Washington. Secondly, leaving the shells on the beach helps sustain the oyster population.
This side of the oyster is more or less flat, and the other side is sort of cupped. Hold the oyster with the hinge toward you like this, and the cup side down. Inside the shell in this general area is a muscle called the adductor, which holds the 2 shells together. Work your oyster knife inside the shell at this point. Once you've got the knife in, slide it around the upper shell like this. What you're doing is finding that muscle and cutting it. See, this is the adductor muscle you cut. All you have to do now is cut that same adductor muscle on the bottom of the shell like this. Once you've got that cut, the oyster is free to slide into your container.
And if you can't resist eating a few on the beach, remember that they all count towards your daily limit.
All the oysters are nicely breaded, so now all we need to do is pan fry them. Bring a skillet to medium hot. Once it's heated, add some cooking oil or butter. I like to cook my oysters until they're nice and golden brown on the outside. Hey Buster, you're supposed to be washing the clams. No big deal. It's hard to overcook clams. Save the broth for dipping or stock. If you find a few clams that didn't open after all that steaming, throw them out. Man, I'm hungry.
You can hear the digger say as they're heading for the bay, oh, I gotta dig a duck a day, 'cause I get a buck a duck if I dig a duck a day, so I gotta dig a duck a day. Dig a duck, dig a duck, dig a